Russia launches more drones and missiles at Kyiv, killing 2 and injuring 16, just hours after Zelensky's talks with US envoy Keith Kellogg. The escalating assaults are stretching Ukraine's air defences as Washington resumes weapons deliveries to bolster Kyiv's response. Ukraine's President Zelensky called on allies to impose new sanctions quickly after Moscow's massive overnight attack with 400 drones and 18 missiles. He warned pressure must be strong enough for Russia to truly feel the consequences of its ongoing terror. US President Trump has raised tariffs on Brazilian goods and US copper imports to 50% starting on August the 1st, citing national security needs. He also sent tariff warnings to the Philippines, Iraq and Sri Lanka, as the EU says it's close to a new trade deal with Washington. Gaza's civil defense says Israeli bombardments overnight have killed 52 people, including 8 children, just hours after Hamas offered to release hostages. Officials say the deadliest attack hit el-Balah, with more casualties in Nuseirat and Berej camps amid ongoing ceasefire talks. Yemen's Iran-backed Houthi rebels say they fired a ballistic missile at Israel's Ben Gurion airport, calling it a qualitative operation. Israeli forces say they intercepted the missile, while Houthi spokesperson Yahya Sari confirmed the attack in a video statement. Sudan's Rapid Support Forces killed 8 civilians in El Fasher after bombing a shelter with a drone, a medical source told the AFP news agency. The attack hit people seeking refuge in the besieged city as communications remain severely restricted. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Washington remains committed to its Asia-Pacific partnerships despite threats of new tariffs. Speaking in Kuala Lumpur, Rubio said the region is still a focal point and the US plans to build stronger ties. Britain and France are set to finalise a migrant return deal as Prime Minister Keir Starmer hosts President Macron on the last day of his state visit. The talks also cover support for Ukraine and a defence reboot, including joint missile development and peacekeeping plans. Now, for our top story, we head to the Middle East, where the Gaza Civil Defense Agency has reported that the death toll has risen to 52 people, including 8 children who were killed in Israeli airstrikes in Gaza overnight. The bombardments targeted central and southern areas of the territory, with the deadliest attack striking Deir el-Balah, where 12 lives were lost. This comes just hours after Hamas announced it was willing to release 10 Israeli hostages as part of ceasefire talks in Qatar. Here's what the Gazan residents had to say.
شيء لا يتصوره العقل، قتل الإنسان، قتل الحجر، قتل البشر، قتل الحيوان، شيء يعني شيء مش طبيعي اللي بصير هذا، شيء مش طبيعي. فيش عندهم نوايا سليمة اللي لوقف الحرب، فيش نوايا بالمرة لوقف الحرب، هيك مبين إن احنا إن شاء الله بتقف الحرب هذه قريب إن شاء الله.
فجأة هيك ما عطوش حذر ولا عطوا حاجة، فجأة انقصفت الدار والناس فيها. لقيت احنا في الوقت هذا كنا نايمين، ما شفنا الا غبره وحجار علينا، طب نصرخ عشان ننقذ اولادنا من تحت الردم، والحمد لله ان اجت اولادنا على قدر هيك.
Meanwhile, the Israeli Defense Forces are reporting major operations in the south. The IDF's Golani Brigade has destroyed a 500-metre-long Hamas tunnel in Khan Yunis, along with over 130 terror infrastructures, including weapon caches and mortar positions, that's according to the IDF. As the conflict intensifies, both sides continue their military operations, with heavy casualties reported on both sides. We're now joined by Professor Kobi Michael, who's a senior researcher at the INSS and Misgav Institute. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor Michael. I first of all want to start with what's going on the battlefield. Reported from the Hamas ran Gaza Health Ministry, there's been 52 deaths overnight, including 8 children. I want to briefly talk about the continued destruction supposedly caused by Israeli airstrikes. Some say indiscriminate. We have 8 children killed here. What are your thoughts on the military strategies of the IDF as peace talks lay going on in the background?
Thank you for having me. First of all, we have to be much more accurate with regard to the figures which are provided, and to remember that all the figures are provided by Hamas.
I did mention that, Professor Michael. I mentioned
yes,
it.
Okay, so now it's my turn to to refer to that. And we have to remember that Hamas is not the ultimate reliable source in this regard, and we witnessed many times before that the figures that were reported by Hamas were not accurate, at least. Secondly, Hamas does not differentiate between combatants and civilians, and for them, all the people who are killed are civilians, and even innocent civilians. The IDF doesn't fight the population, the civilians. On the contrary, the IDF warns the civilians to leave the combat zones, and it even loses its capabilities to surprise Hamas by alarming in advance the people to leave these locations. And we are not in peace talks with Hamas because there is no peace, and there is no any option to have peace with Hamas. We are negotiating with Hamas through the mediators in order to reach to a sort of an agreement, be it a Witkoff proposal or another agreement. And as long as there is no such an agreement, the war continues. And we have to remember that the first responsibility and the main responsibility with regard to this war and the casualties, the unfortunate and sadly, I would say, casualties, are first of all on the shoulders of Hamas. They decide to continue the war. They decide to continue using their people as human shields. They decide to continue using humanitarian and civilian facilities like hospitals, schools, UN facilities, even cemeteries, whatever you want, as terror compounds. And therefore, the IDF has to deal and to tackle a very complicated combat zone, the most complicated one in any comparison to other urban warfare zones. And I hope that we will be able to finalize the Gazan case and to reach to an agreement where Hamas will not remain as an effective sovereign power in the Gaza Strip.
Yes, Professor Michael, just to say we have to use those figures coming out of the Gazan Health Ministry, as Israel doesn't let any independent press into the Gaza Strip. However, Benjamin Netanyahu, some of his critics coming from within Israel, mainly the relatives of hostages, are seeing that Benjamin Netanyahu is signaling that the release of these hostages are his top priority now, and defeating and quashing Hamas has fallen down the pile. Some would say there's been conflicting opinions on this. Do you see these talks as optimism for these hostages that are still held in Gaza? We have 27 that Israel intelligence has confirmed have been killed. But for those who are still alive, Professor Michael, is there optimism for them?
I think that there is a bit more optimism with regard to the Witkoff proposal, which is partial with regard to the total number of the hostages, alive or dead, which means that 10 hostages who are alive will be released in 60 days, and 18 dead hostages. But it doesn't mean that we will be able to reach to the second phase. And I'm not sure that Hamas is willing on the one side or capable on the other hand to release all the hostages due to two major reasons. The first one is that as long as Hamas keeps hostages, they keep the ultimate insurance policy for their survival, and as long as they will not be sure in 1,000,000% that they have the international guarantees, mainly the American guarantees, that Israel will not resume the war under any conditions, they will not be willing to release all the hostages. Secondly, I'm not sure that Hamas is capable to release all the hostages because Hamas doesn't hold all the hostages, mainly the dead hostages. And we have to remember that the Gaza Strip of today, with regard to the geography and the terrain, is not something that we used to know a year or 2 years ago. And many combatants of Hamas that buried dead hostages are not with us anymore.
Okay.
And I'm not sure that Hamas will be capable to reach to the places that these hostages are buried. And
Yes.
in addition to that, there are some other Palestinian factions that hold hostages, and they do not comply to Hamas.
Professor,
So I'm not sure.
Professor,
Yes.
I do apologise. We have run out of time on that story. You are staying with us. However, your insight is valued. We now move on to some more developments from the region. Yemen's Houthi rebels claim they fired a ballistic missile at Israel's Ben Gurion airport. The Israeli military says it intercepted the attack. Houthi spokesman Yahya Sari called it a qualitative military operation, marking an escalation in their regional strikes amid ongoing tensions. Here's what the Houthi military spokesman had to say.
نفذت القوة الصاروخية في القوات المسلحة اليمنية عملية عسكرية نوعية استهدفت مطار اللد في منطقة يافا المحتلة، وذلك بصاروخ باليستي نوع ذي الفقار، وقد حققت العملية هدفها بنجاح بفضل الله، وتسببت في دوي صفارات الإنذار في أكثر من 300 بلدة ومدينة، وهروع ملايين الصهاينة إلى الملاجئ، ووقف حركة الملاحة في المطار.
We're once again joined by Professor Michael to discuss this in further detail. Professor, this is an ongoing situation with the Houthi rebels over in Yemen, Iran-backed proxy group. What are the military capabilities of the Houthis that we know, especially now Iran's military capabilities and have been not destroyed, severely damaged during the Iran-Israel conflict? And what is the feeling in Israel about them?
The military capacities or capabilities of the Houthis are pretty limited, okay? They are able to harm Israel only by their ballistic missiles, and they still have some, and by drones. And most of the missiles and the drones are intercepted by the air defense systems that Israel uses. But we cannot deny that this is something which is very annoying, where millions of people has to hear the sirens and to go to shelters until the missiles or the drones will be intercepted. We are in a sort of an attrition war. Israel retaliates and Israel harms the Houthis, but this will not decide the Houthis. In order to decide the Houthis, we need to have a very broad international and regional coalition. We have to have boots on the ground, and we have to bring the government, the legitimate government of Yemen, which is located in the southern part of Yemen, and to bring them to be part of this war against the Houthis, together with some tribes, Yemeni tribes in the north, which are rivals of the Houthis in the north. Till then, and if Israel alone will have to retaliate, I think that we find ourselves in a sort of an attrition war, that from time to time Israel attacks the Houthis and causes some damages, but this will not stop them.
Yes, we move on to another development. Dr. Michael, please stay with us. Rescue efforts are continuing in the Red Sea after the Greek-operated Liberia-flagged vessel labelled Eternity Sea was sank by the Houthi proxy group. Maritime security sources confirmed that 4 more crew members were rescued today, bringing the total number of survivors to 10. However, 11 crew members are still missing. The ship was attacked with sea drones and rocket-propelled grenades. After a second assault, the crew was forced to abandon ship. Rescuers have been working to locate those still unaccounted for. The Houthis have claimed responsibility for the attack, which they says is an act of solidarity with Palestinians amid the ongoing Gaza conflict. The United States has condemned the Houthis' actions. Meanwhile, maritime security experts continue to assess the situation, hoping to bring the remaining crew members to safety. Now we're once again joined by Professor Kobi Michael to discuss this developing story. Professor Michael, we just spoke about the Houthis' capabilities that they have on Israel. However, the Red Sea is a different story. What are the Houthis' objectives here? What kind of destruction are they able to cause in that region?
The Houthis actually wants to signal to the entire international community that they are capable to cause damages, mainly economic damages, by blocking Bab el-Mandeb Straits, which is a crucial crossing for, I would say, ships that are coming from the east, from India, China, to Europe, and they have to cross the Suez Canal. And in order to reach to the Suez Canal, you have to cross the Red Sea. And in order to cross the Red Sea, you have to enter Bab el-Mandeb Straits that are now controlled and blocked by the Houthis. Now, this is not a private problem of the state of Israel, although Israel suffers from that because we have a port in the south, in the southern part of Israel, in Eilat, in the Red Sea, and this port is paralyzed because there are no ships that are crossing the Red Sea in order to reach this port. But this is not a private problem of Israel. This is a global problem, not even a regional problem, but a global problem. And the condemnation is not enough. And here the Houthis have more capabilities in comparison to the capabilities against Israel because they are there in the Red Sea. And we see that they are capable to hit by using short-range missiles. They can hit ships and sink them. And I think that here there must be, I would say, a joint effort of the international community with the regional players in order to prevent the Houthis from doing that. And the only way to do that is actually to attack the Houthis in a way that will paralyze them in a very severe manner.
Professor Michael, just one more final question. You said that the Houthis' capabilities in the Red Sea is better, but it doesn't impact on Israel as much. However, they say these strikes here are in order to stay in as an act of solidarity with Palestinians amid the ongoing Gaza conflict. Why have they targeted this Greek-operated Eternity Sea ship? What is their aims in this, if they are standing with Gaza in their aims of their strikes?
First of all, to demonstrate their identification and solidarity with the Palestinians. This is part of their ideology because they perceive Israel, the US, and the entire West as the big Satan, exactly like Iran. They are Shiites as well. They are very radical and extreme from the ideological point of view, the religious ideological point of view. And secondly, this is a very effective leverage that they have, or they think that they have, on Israel in order to stop the war, to cease the war in the Gaza Strip. And they say more than once that if the war will be ceased, then they will stop attacking Israel, and they will stop blocking the straits. I'm not sure that they will do it very rapidly, but at least this is what they declare. And as long as the war in Gaza continues, they continue launching missiles and drones towards Israel, and they continue blocking the straits, Bab el-Mandeb Straits.
Yes, Professor Kobi Michael, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. Your insight is very much valued. We now move over to Europe for our next story, where hundreds of Russian drones and more than a dozen missiles rained down on the Ukrainian capital, killing 2 people in a second massive airstrike on Ukraine in 2 days. This comes as Kyiv seeks critical aid from its partner at a meeting in Rome. As per reports, 19 people were wounded in the attack, and damage has been reported in nearly every district of Kyiv. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that the assault involved around 400 drones and 18 missiles, primarily targeting the capital. Let's listen in to how the residents are reacting to the prevailing situation. Apologies, we seem to have had some technical issues there. However, we move on. In other news, the security service of Ukraine has said that one of its members has been killed in central Kyiv. As per an AFP report, a criminal investigation has been launched into the murder. We're now joined by Professor Veselin Popovsky, who is a professor and vice dean of Jindal Global Law School. Professor, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. This comes 24 hours after the largest barrage of drones in the war, another significant drone strike and missile strike from Moscow over to the Ukrainian capital this time. However, in positivity, in Ukraine's stance, we have the resumption of aid from Washington, military aid from Washington. How important of a time is this for Kyiv, especially as we see Russia escalating its strikes over the border?
Yes, Joshua, I think the two are very connected. More strikes on Kyiv and other cities in Ukraine will mean more support, including military for Ukraine. So no surprise, Russia has its last options left to massively use drone attacks against cities because they cannot do much on the battlefield. There is very little Russia can achieve in Donetsk and the rest of the front lines. All they want to somehow do is to inflict civilian damage in big cities. And that's what they do. It's kind of a last resort, last hopes for Putin to survive. But we see the unification of the European countries and the change in position by Trump administration, offering more Patriots rockets, more air defense systems to support Ukraine. So the two are connected. More Russia does this, more support will go to Ukraine to defend its civilians, its cities, and also to counterbalance the Russian attack on the battlefield.
Professor Popovsky, why do you think that, especially after Putin is trying to supposedly move peace talks forward, in his words, why is Russia stepping up on these big airstrikes at this time right now?
Again, I would like to connect the two, although they looks very paradoxical. On one hand, the Russian diplomacy is saying they're happy for a third round of negotiation in Istanbul, Turkey. And on another hand, the military continue with deadly strikes on civilians. And this has been the case for the last 5-6 months already. It's a game. Russia tries to play a game. They want to look constructive and talking diplomacy and a round of negotiation in Istanbul, and at the same time, their military do exactly the opposite, which basically reduces significantly any hopes that the peace negotiation in Istanbul will produce much. This is a game, everybody already understands it. It's a very cruel and hypocritical game by Vladimir Putin, and he is losing his allies. There is not much left for Putin. Even countries in the global south are distancing themselves, Brazil, other countries. I hope India one day also will distance itself from Putin, and he will be left with North Korea and Iran as the only two supporters.
Professor Popovsky, you are staying with us to discuss further updates. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused Vladimir Putin of trying to destroy life itself through escalating attacks on Ukraine. Speaking at the Ukraine Recovery Conference in Rome, Zelensky called for urgent investments in defense. He urged partners to increase support, warning that Russia's missiles and drones must be stopped. This comes as Kyiv confirmed a member of Ukraine's security services was murdered in a targeted attack in central Kyiv. Authorities have launched an investigation. Zelensky stressed that funding shortages could be deadly amid intensifying Russian strikes across the country. This comes as the Kremlin denies peace talks with Ukraine and that they have stalled. Spokesman Dmitry Peskov says Moscow is still waiting for signals from Kyiv for a third round of talks. No new meeting has now been announced by either side. We're once again joined by Professor Popovsky. I wanted to first talk about how important this meeting is, Professor Popovsky, this meeting that is currently going on in Rome. What does Zelensky hope to get out of its alliances, and also the signalling that Russia has put forward that Kyiv isn't, that it is not stalling talks? What are your thoughts?
The meeting in Rome is important because it brings together the European countries discussing the reconstruction of Ukraine, what will happen one day after the ceasefire is achieved, what investments are necessary. Again, it goes with the line of what has been already agreed between the United States and Ukraine in terms of exploration of mineral resources. So those are very connected, again, efforts. On one hand, to achieve ceasefire. On another hand, to think about how to revitalize the economy of Russia, how to achieve further investment opportunities in Ukraine. And for that matter, I think these are steps into the right directions. We see Meloni, the Prime Minister, playing a very useful role here because she's kind of closer to both sides. She's very close to the core of the European Union members, but also she has a very friendly dialogue with Donald Trump's administration in the United States, and both of these possibly play a role. So Meloni could be that link between the European allies supporting Ukraine strongly and the Donald Trump administration, which is still kind of hesitant and playing a zigzag game between the two.
Yes, we have some more updates coming out of Rome, where Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni welcomed Ukrainian President Zelensky and First Lady Orlena Zelensky to the Ukraine Recovery Conference, a gathering that brought together over 50 heads of state, government leaders and ministers. Speaking at the La Nuova Conference Centre, Zelensky urged international partners to step up defence investments, warning that Russia's escalating drone and missile strikes show that Vladimir Putin wants to destroy life itself in Ukraine. I've got a quote here: "We must stop Russian drones and missiles," he said, calling for more funding and faster sanctions against Moscow. He warned that when Russia increases attacks, Ukraine cannot afford to face a funding shortage. He later added that these strikes are pure terrorism. Let's listen in to what he said.
We must focus on first. We must stop Russian drones and missiles. And this means more air defense supplies and more investments in interceptor drones, air defense systems, and of course missiles. And I urge all our partners, increase your investments. When Russia increases its attacks, we cannot have a shortage of funding for drone production.
The importance of global unity and apologies there. Giorgia Meloni stresses the importance of global unity and investment in rebuilding Ukraine, calling on entrepreneurs not to fear investing in the country's future. Quote, investing in Ukraine's reconstruction is not a gamble. It's an investment in a nation that has shown more resilience than any other. Here's what she had to say.
Dovremo tenerne conto in futuro. Dovremo tenere conto di chi ha fatto tutto ciò che poteva per impedire questa barbarie e chi invece non l'ha fatto. Ed è per questo che, come è scritto anche nella dichiarazione dei ministri delle finanze del G7, noi vogliamo lavorare con l'Ucraina anche per non consentire che della ricostruzione possano beneficiare anche quelle entità che hanno contribuito a finanziare la macchina da guerra russa.
Among those present, EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez and Czech President Petr Pavel, among many others. In parallel, Zelensky will also meet French President Emmanuel Macron and British PM Keir Starmer to discuss the urgent need for interceptor drones and air defence systems. We're once again joined by Professor Veselin Popovsky to discuss this in further detail. Professor Popovsky, what does Zelensky's warning about this pure terrorism, that's what he's labelled it as, mean to partners that are in attendance to this conference, and how should it respond to Russia's new attacks?
The Europeans are very clear that this is terrorism. They already prepared to support Ukraine with further armaments. Particularly the air defense system of Ukraine needs to be supported by deliveries. The meeting in Rome, but also the statement by President Macron and Prime Minister Starmer go very much into that direction. So, yes, Ukraine needs more defense systems, and hopefully it will happen very soon. That meeting is crucial that happened today in Rome to condemn the Russian terrorism, which is continuous, targeting civilians all the time, and also supporting Ukraine, especially with mobilization.
Yes. Before we move on, let's take a listen in to what Zelensky had to say.
Russia has also prepared for this meeting. Just last night, they launched another massive attack on Ukraine, mainly targeting our capital, Kyiv. The attack involved Russian, Iranian Shahid drones. These drones have been heavily upgraded to cause more destruction and to be harder to shoot down. Ukrainians now face attacks by hundreds of these drones every single night. And this is pure terrorism.
Yes, we're once again joined by Popovsky, Professor Popovsky, to get your reaction to that statement. We've heard of increased military capabilities from Russia that have been supplied by its allies. As you previously mentioned, Iran and others are still supporting Russia. What are your thoughts on the possible growing military capabilities of Moscow in this conflict, and especially in Ukraine's strength and its alliance's strength, its military capabilities in countering it?
Exactly. Well, Iranian and North Korean support for Russia should be counterbalanced by support for Ukraine, including air defense systems. And that is clearly realized in the European capitals. Also, they clearly name what Russia does as terrorism. There is no doubt about that. The definition of terrorism is targeting civilians, killing civilians for political purposes. This is exactly what the Russian state does in Ukraine. And the question is how far Iran and North Korea, which are under pressure themselves from the international community largely, will be able to continue the support for Russia. So far, yes, they did support Russia. But for example, the Iranian regime is under severe stress by recent developments, and it needs to think about its own survival rather than to think about Putin's survival. So I guess the time will work towards Ukraine. Russia is losing support of the world. Nobody is anymore any support apart from Iran and North Korea in military terms. Unfortunately, big countries should also sanction Russia in terms of buying oil and gas. That will also bring a significant change if countries like India, for example, also interrupt importing Russian oil and gas. That will be another severe blow on Putin and his terrorist strategy.
Yes, Professor Veselin Popovsky, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. We now stay in Europe but move over to the United Kingdom for our next story, where French President Emmanuel Macron says Europe must play a central role in tackling illegal migration. Speaking alongside UK officials, he stressed the need for common resolve to combat smugglers and secure entry points into Europe. Macron called poverty a root cause of migration and urged joint action to stop human trafficking. He said the UK and France are opening a new chapter in security and economic ties. Macron wants the EU to join these talks after initial bilateral discussions. He said illegal migration is a shared responsibility that demands collective solutions. Here's what the French President and the British Prime Minister had to say on the issue.
Toutes ces dernières années, vous savez, l'engagement de la France et nos ministres ont en effet ouvert une nouvelle phase, et l'accord politique qui est scellé aujourd'hui est d'importance, parce que nous sommes tous lucides et nous partageons la même volonté de lutter contre les réseaux.
The situation in the Channel cannot go on as it is. So we're bringing new tactics into play and a new level of intent to tackle illegal migration and break the business model of the criminal gangs.
We're now joined by Joshua Barnes, anchor and correspondent, to give us more details on this situation. Joshua, can you tell us a little bit about what's going on in regards to these talks? What do both sides want? What are the problems that they are facing?
Well, yes, absolutely, Thomas. Immigration is a key point of contention in both France and the United Kingdom. It has fed, in part, some of the rise of right-wing politics in both countries, and the issue is one that both nations are looking to resolve. Now, splitting the United Kingdom and France is the Channel, and that is a popular point of crossing on potentially dangerous boats for migrants who are seeking refuge in the United Kingdom. There are also a large amount of migrants who stay in France, a lot of camps along the border as well. The situation is a difficult one, and it's one that governments have tried to resolve. In the United Kingdom, there was something called the Rwanda Plan, which was a deterrent which cost hundreds of millions if it was fully enacted from the previous Conservative government. That was aiming to try and limit the number of small boat crossings and stopping people coming into the country illegally. Now, the burden of migrants on economies of both France and the United Kingdom are large, of course, housing, processing, and then potentially deporting if asylum is not granted. It is a situation that both Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer have been strong on. Keir Starmer adopting more of a stance that you have seen from right-leaning politicians within the United Kingdom to try and garner support around the issue. It is a point of contention in UK society. It's also a point of contention in France. It will be interesting to see whether these words actually result in any direct actions. There have been discussions between the United Kingdom and France about joint work to stop these small boat crossings and the impact on the economies, and then of course the rhetoric and the opinions that are coming off the back of migration in a time of cost of living struggles. They haven't always manifested into concrete action. This one in, one out that has been announced, the start of a potential plan coming into place. We will of course bring you updates on that when it is enacted and how successful it is.
Joshua, can you tell us a bit about the political landscape in both France and the United Kingdom, and the public attitudes from both countries, and how it's affecting the political landscape there?
Well, yes, absolutely, Thomas. I slightly alluded to it before, but there is a sincere and strong rise of right-wing politics in pockets of Europe, and that includes France and the United Kingdom. In terms of sort of what we're looking at with polls and opinions, it does seem that far right is moving up. The Reform Party in the United Kingdom, a generally new party spearheaded by Nigel Farage, who is a figure who was divided the nation with more not supporting him than supporting him in the past, but he is gaining popularity. Former UKIP leader as well, looking at independence and migration is a key pillar of his manifesto and his promises. This is a rising party. Also in France as well, Marine Le Pen, before some controversy surrounding banning her from elections, she was rising as the potential successor of Emmanuel Macron. There is a right-wing movement that we're seeing across European nations, and migration is a key part of that. This is post-Brexit in the United Kingdom situation, also post-COVID, severe economic hits to both France and the United Kingdom, and cost of living has been a huge issue. Several different implementations from the previous Conservative Party in the United Kingdom as well have rocked the economy, and people are generally feeling inflation is hitting them harder. Wages aren't increasing at the same rate. Issues in the United Kingdom around healthcare as well are driving this discontent. Migration is a topic of contention with the amount of funds that are required to process migrants, house migrants. It's also a point for extremism as well. We have seen different incidents of violence based around misinformation on migration. It is a contentious topic. It is a boiling point, and it's polarising as well. So for Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron, they're looking at a situation that they want to try and resolve, but also save face. And in their eyes, I think it's more of a situation of, if you're seen to be doing something, then the problem is lesser. Inaction in the past, failed plans have seen limited action and improvements in a situation. This could be a step towards changing that.
Joshua Barnes, thank you very much for joining us. We will bring you all the information in regards to updates of that ongoing meeting between the French President and the UK Prime Minister. They're currently holding these talks on migration, a huge issue in both countries of France and the United Kingdom. They are pushing forward this so-called one in and one out policy, a plan that where Britain would accept asylum seekers from France with a UK connection in exchange for returning some migrants back to France. This isn't a deal which is currently in place. Around 50 migrants under this plan could be sent each week, each way per week under an initial pilot scheme. That's a small fraction, by the way, to the usual numbers that cross the 22-mile English Channel on a weekly basis. In number 10, Starmer says both countries agreed to this situation and that it cannot go on as it is. This wraps up the state visit by French President to the United Kingdom. We now move over to our next story, where US Secretary of State Marco Rubio touched down in Kuala Lumpur on Thursday for the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting. This marks his first trip to the Southeast Asia region since taking office earlier this year. Rubio is leading the US delegation in a series of high-level ASEAN-led talks. It's also the first time both US and Chinese top diplomats are attending the summit together. However, it's unclear if they'll hold a bilateral. The US began formal ties with ASEAN in 1977 and upgraded to a strategic partnership in 2015 and a comprehensive one in 2022. Now we move on to another related development. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi met on Thursday in Kuala Lumpur during the ASEAN summit. The two leaders discussed the growth of political dialogue and practical cooperation between their countries, emphasizing their shared stance amid rising global tensions. According to the Russian Foreign Ministry, both nations expressed strong opposition to plans to militarize the Asia-Pacific region, particularly efforts to introduce military infrastructure similar to that of NATO. This comes as Moscow and Beijing continue to align on key international issues, reinforcing their strategic partnership. We're now joined by Joshua Barnes, my colleague, to discuss this in further detail. Joshua, what more can you tell us about this important meeting over in Southeast Asia?
Well, yes, absolutely. This is one of the high-profile bilateral talks that is taking place at this ASEAN Foreign Ministers Summit. You mentioned it there. Global tensions rising, dividing lines being drawn as a result of different ideologies. And that is something that we have seen with Russia and China coming to closer ties amid multiple different factors. The first one, of course, is trade. US tariffs introduced by US President Donald Trump, the impact of those affecting China, of course, and rhetoric now around Russian potential third-party tariffs that could be up to 500% on countries that buy Russian oil. China, a country that buys a large volume of Russian oil, so implications to both nations. Also ongoing conflicts as well, the Russia-Ukraine war. Of course, Western alliances supporting Ukraine. China have spoken about being impartial and being fair in this conflict and wanting de-escalation, but communications and conversations have been had with Russian allies, Russia and China as well, over this conflict. Questions have been raised about whether China are directly involved through arms sales to Russia, so something that has been discussed. But a clear divide here, West between other nations. Russia and China are aligned, and it will be interesting to find out further information on joint statements at the end of these discussions in the ASEAN Foreign Ministers Summit, because it could be a policy shift, but there could also be rhetoric that we haven't heard before on ongoing conflicts that at this point are in third, fourth years. Also the Middle East situation as well, boiling points with geopolitical ramifications. Big news coming out of this summit expected, and we will be here to bring that all to you.
Joshua Barnes, thank you very much. You are staying with us. We now move on. China has sharply criticized the United States for imposing a 50% tariff on copper imports. The tariff, announced by President Donald Trump on Wednesday, is justified national security grounds and is set to take effect on August the 1st, according to the president. Copper, a key metal used in green energy production and technology, is at the center of this escalating trade dispute. China's government has argued that such measures could disrupt global trade and harm both countries. The US decision marks another chapter in the ongoing tensions between Washington and Beijing, with both sides locked in a broader trade and economic standoff.
因为我们立场非常明确，我们一贯反对泛化国家安全概念。我们也始终认为，关税战、贸易战没有赢家，滥施关税不符合任何一方的利益。
This is obviously an ongoing situation with both China and the United States. They have had trade disputes in the past this year in regards to Donald Trump's tariffs, and Beijing has certainly not been quiet on that. We're now joined by Vibhuti Jha, who's a former Republican Party candidate. She joins us live from New York. He joins us live from New York. Vibhuti, what is your view on this ongoing spat between Beijing and Washington, especially in regards to copper production? These new tariffs announced, a 50% tariff, Vibhuti, has been put on this metal. What are your thoughts on how this situation is going to develop?
Thank you very much for having me. What I wanted to say, two things. One is that what started off as a reciprocal tariff, it's escalating into one conflict over the other regarding each specific item of trade. So China and United States, one must consider as very interesting allies and competitors in the domestic and international fields, both of them. Both of them complement each other, both of them compete with each other, and each one is trying to gain a leverage, a political leverage and economic leverage. And that's nothing new. I think it was expected as a student of international banking and finance and economics. I know trade barriers and trade tariffs and everything else is part of the deal. And it's very interesting, Mr. Trump's book is about art of the deal. So you are trying to negotiate what is best for you, what is most economically advantageous to you, and each country in that regard pulls the trigger, what suits the best. And I think China and United States are, remember, people must not forget that it was President Obama who had actually floated the idea of 1-2 countries that let China and America dominate the world conversation and the politics and economics, trade and everything else, which went public and it was decried upon, that you cannot have a tie-up with a communist country and a capitalist country trying to rule the world. So let's look back from the positive and the negative, looking back, looking forward. And what we are looking at here is a very different scenario when Mr. Trump is trying to fix US economy. That is the uppermost goal that he has. The fixing American economy is the key element because US doesn't manufacture anything anymore, including life-saving drugs. Think about it, from 9/11 memorabilia, pins, and to life-saving drugs, China makes them. So that's where the supply chain issue that came about, that China threatened that if you play the tariff game, I'm going to choke your supply chain. And that's true. China can actually do that because a whole lot of US businesses, mom and pop shops, 90% of the US economy is in private sector, and they depend upon Chinese supplies. A lot of US manufacturing has indeed moved to China. So now suddenly people realize that we are victims of our own policies in which we allowed manufacturing to go away from America. That killed, in my opinion, the soul of the country. And that's what Mr. Trump is trying to bring back. So it is not easy to undo things that have happened in the last 50 years. So as we know the Indian story, whatever changes have been made in India during Modi regime, it's not easy to do because Congress established legal precedences and laws that is very difficult to dismantle. Likewise, in the US case right now, it is a political and economic leverage. China is prepared to choke the supply chain, and it can bring the US economy to be a grinding halt by just supplying, just stopping. When Trump is threatening with increased tariff, China has to do only one thing, and that is, I'm not going to supply any goods and services for the next 7 days. That will hurt US big time. And that's the reason you find that the Trump administration is absolutely going nuts over this entire trade and negotiation for critical earth material and everything else. See, remember one thing, very important.
Vibhuti, I do apologise. We have a related development coming up, but you are staying with us to discuss that the Philippines has expressed concern over the United States' decision to impose a 20% tariff on Philippine exports, but Manila says it remains committed to continuing negotiations in good faith. Economic Affairs Secretary Frederick Go confirmed that the talks are underway for a bilateral agreement or even a possible free trade deal. Here's a look at what he said.
We are in receipt of the United States' latest reciprocal tariff for the Philippines. We are concerned that the U.S. has decided to impose a 20% tariff on Philippine exports. The fact remains, however, that the 20% rate is the second lowest among all reciprocal tariffs that the U.S. has imposed on the region.
A Philippine delegation is scheduled to visit Washington
in good faith to pursue a bilateral comprehensive economic agreement, or, if possible,
A Philippine delegation is scheduled to visit Washington next week for high-level discussions ahead of the August 1st deadline when the tariff takes effect. Ambassador Jose Manuel Romandoles also stressed that Manila will push to reduce the tariff rate, which he says is among the lowest in Southeast Asia. The US is a critical export market for the Philippines, accounting for nearly 16% of its total exports in the first 5 months of this year. Meanwhile, officials say they're committed to economic reforms and will continue to pursue trade deals globally to diversify export destinations and maintain market competitiveness. And this is obviously one of Donald Trump's letters that he sent out in regards to his new tariffs, which are being imposed on now the 1st of August. That changed from July the 9th, just a couple of days ago. We're now joined by Vibhuti Jha to discuss this in further detail. Vibhuti, thank you very much for joining us. Given the South Asian countries and how much Southeast Asian countries and how much they do rely on the US economy, how much power does Donald Trump have in his hand to, if they just impose these deals without any deals being met, what are going to be the ramifications for both the Philippines and also US consumers?
This is very critical. Southeast Asian countries were part of the Grand Alliance during the Second World War to defeat Japan, the imperial power of those days. So US has significant military bases in Southeast Asian countries. They have to contain China, and the Chinese dragon becomes the main play for all policies. Now, let's remember one thing clearly. All US and in Vietnam, they have fought bitter war. Korea, they have fought a bitter war, led to division of Vietnam and Korea between South and North. Japan is already in the ambit of China attack. Taiwan is the issue. And none of these Southeast Asian countries, which are much smaller than China, enjoy the prospect of being dominated by China. And the only power that can hold them together against China or protecting their own territorial integrity and security, because the Chinese dominance and communism, is United States. So they are dependent on America to a great extent for their exports, because US offers them tremendous advantage. At this point in time, there are lots of ifs and buts. And I do not want to get into one particular element or the other, but what is happening here is that Trump is taking a remarkably strong-headed attitude that since Southeast Asian countries are dependent on American market, let's take full advantage of that with reference to tariff.
Yes.
So this will hurt the Southeast Asian nations. These countries also are looking towards India as a potential for an equally big market. So there is a significant geopolitical play going on with reference to Southeast Asian countries. They formed a bloc, just as EU did in Europe, or NATO is there, that they formed ASEAN. China is always there in all these matters. So it is a very tricky situation for Southeast Asian nations to avoid the tariff, but they will have to negotiate because US is kind of a protector country for them vis-a-vis China.
Vibhuti Jha, thank you very much for joining us on the program. We now move over to Saudi Arabia. And the country has executed 2 Ethiopian nationals convicted of smuggling hashish, the Interior Ministry said, bringing the number of foreigners put to death this year to at least 101. The men, identified as Khalil Qasim Mohammed Omar and Murad Katub Adam Sio, were sentenced after a court found them guilty under the kingdom's strict drug laws. So far in 2025, a number of 189 people have been executed, including 88 Saudis, according to an AFP tally. The Gulf Kingdom remains one of the world's top users of the death penalty, with executions surging in recent years. In 2024, the 100 foreigner mark was only crossed in November. We're now joined by Joshua Barnes to discuss this further. Joshua, what further details can you give us on this case and the whole attitude, the Saudi attitude towards capital punishment in general?
Well, yes, I think the situation in Saudi is clear. Their laws are much more stronger, much more stringent on certain things that you may get away with in other countries, especially Western countries as well. Tight drug laws, of course, alcohol laws as well. Minor crimes in some countries like European and Western nations, like theft, much harsher punishments at play. It is a situation that can be alarming to a Westerner looking upon this, but this of course is the way that Saudi is run. There are instances that you hear of Westerners travelling over to Saudi and falling foul of laws that don't exist in their country. So it is a figure that is higher than usual. As you've mentioned, over 100 foreigners executed. Capital punishment is being eradicated from Western cultures in certain regions. We're seeing questions about the death penalty in the United States as well. So it is a topic of discussion, but ultimately the laws in Saudi are what they are. It's not over proportionate compared to the legal system that they have. That is just how they do things. It's different to Western worlds and does raise questions, further questions about human rights as well. For workers is something that has been raised, but something that of course will continue to be discussed.
Yes, Joshua, thank you very much for joining us. We have some breaking news coming in from Europe, where Ukraine has said that one of its security service members was killed on Thursday in central Kyiv in what appeared to be the most recent targeted attack, and we currently have the CCTV footage of the attack. Let's take a look at it. There we have it, central Kyiv, the breaking news, this coming straight out of the region. This was a drone strike that occurred in Kyiv. We are bringing you the CCTV visuals freshly out now. As you can see, the individual was getting into his car, and now we see another individual running away from the scene and is what is suspected to be a murder of one of Ukraine's security service members who have been killed today in central Kyiv. We will bring you all the information as we get it from this developing situation, but there we have it. Some breaking visuals, bringing them straight to you. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news up.